I appreciate everybody being here. I hope you're doing well tonight. We're in the book of Exodus chapter 32 tonight. Book of Exodus chapter 32. Hope that you're having a good day and a good week. We're finishing up this study through the book of Exodus. What we'll do is for the next few weeks, as God allows and time allows, we will go very slowly through the first half of this chapter. And then we'll hit some high points over the next few chapters, and we will be done with the book of Exodus. And then we will jump right into the book of Numbers as just kind of a continuation. But previously, we've looked at everything with the tabernacle. We're skipping over some things, but it's almost just a repeat. I don't want to keep us too slow in going through things, knowing that the golden calf is we're going to crack this open and take it one piece at a time. And look at a very pivotal moment, not just at this point in time, but how this is going to impact Israel for generations. And it's not going to go away. Once this door is open, it's going to be here to stay throughout her history. So what we're going to read tonight, what we're going to start on studying is going to be a very pivotal moment. So let's have a word of prayer, and then we'll read through this, not the entire chapter, but we'll read through some of the verses, and we'll go through, just go back and look at them one at a time and move slowly starting tonight. Father, thank you for everything you do for us. We're very thankful for the opportunity to be here and to study your word, to mutually encourage one another and build one another up in the middle of this week. We're thankful, Father, for every family that is able to be here with us. We're mindful of those who are unable to be with us, and we pray that you will bless them. To the point where they will be able to rejoin us on Sunday or as soon as possible. We're thankful for your Son, Christ. He is the example and the perfect reality of everything that we are reading in the Old Testament. We pray, Father, that we're growing in our knowledge and our appreciation of Him. And as we go through this account in the book of Exodus, and just the study of Exodus as a whole, help us to remember that these things were written down for our learning. So that through the encouragement and the hope of the Scriptures that we could continue to run our race. Father, we pray that we will take these lessons to heart, and not just to our heart in the sense of just actually having them in there, but learning from them. And in this case, learning from a very, very poor decision, sinful decision that is made by Aaron and the children of Israel. And even in the middle of all of that, we can see how gracious you are as you show your capacity to forgive people, not of the consequences, but to forgive them of the sin. We pray, Father, that we'll remember that too. Because we do sin, we do fall short, we have this very day. And yet your graciousness has been extended to all of us. And we're thankful for that. And it's because of Jesus that we can ask these things and pray these things in His name. Amen. All right, let's read Exodus 32, and we'll read down to verse 20, if you will. And then we'll go back to the beginning, and we'll just start all over. But let's read it, just to kind of freshen our minds up to the discussion for tonight. I'd encourage you to keep reading through this for the next several weeks, as, again, we're going to be in this. So just read it, make notes, ask questions, anything like that, and be prepared for the study. So Exodus 32, beginning with verse 1. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered themselves together to Aaron and said to him, "Up, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." So Aaron said to them, "Take off the rings of gold that are in the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." So all the people took off the rings of the gold that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he received the gold from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made a golden calf. And they said, "These are our God. These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it. And Aaron made a proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord." And they rose up early the next day and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. And the Lord said to Moses, "Go down, for your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt, have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside quickly out of the way that I commanded them. They have made for themselves a golden calf and have worshipped it and sacrificed to it and said, These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And the Lord said to Moses, I have seen this people, and behold, it is a stiff-necked people. Now, therefore, let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, in order that I may make a great nation of you. But Moses implored the Lord his God, and said, O Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people, whom you have brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say, with evil intent did he bring them out, to kill them in the mountains and to consume them from the face of the earth? Turn from your burning anger and relent from this disaster against your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, to whom you swore by your own self and said to them, I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven. And all this land I promised I will give to your offspring, and they shall inherit it forever. And the Lord relented from the disaster that he had spoken of bringing on his people. Then Moses turned and went down from the mountain with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hand. Tablets that were written on both sides, on the front and on the back they were written. The tablets were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God, engraved on the tablets. When Joshua heard the noise of the people as they shouted, he said to Moses, There's a noise of war in the camp. But he said, It is not the sound of shouting for victory, or the sound of cry of defeat, but the sound of singing I hear. And as soon as he came near the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, Moses' anger burned hot, and he threw the tablets out of his hands and broke them at the foot of the mountain. He took the calf that they had made and burned it with fire, ground it to powder, scattered it on the water, and made the people of Israel to drink it. So instead, this becomes a very pivotal moment in Israel's history. So let's go all the way back to verse 1. We're going to take our time and look at a couple of things, and I don't expect us to cover a lot of ground tonight, and that's okay because we'll be able to make a lot of application. So verse 1 refers back to Exodus 24, verses 15 through 18. Moses has been gone for how long? How long has he been up in the mountain? Okay, 40 days, 40 nights. So a little over a month, maybe a month and a half if you want to do that. Israel's probably been out of Egypt around 2 months or so. But you have everything taking place from Exodus 19 up to this point. You've got Moses out for about 40 days and 40 nights. That's how long it's been. So why does the delay bother Israel so much? Okay. All right. So describe this pleasant place for a moment. Remind us of what it is.
So it's really rugged.
Okay.
It's really dry. Depending on the time of year, it would have been really hot.
All right. You didn't hear what Brian said. It's really rugged, just rocky, hard to navigate, hard to travel. If you're camped at the base of Mount Sinai, it's just uncomfortable because you're sleeping on rocks. You're around rocks. It's depending on the time of the year, it's very hot, and it's also going to be very dry, and you just are seeing the same thing over and over and over. So you have that just from a geographical standpoint. That contributes to Israel's place.
And they had seen scary things.
Okay, they had seen some scary things. Could you remember what kind of things had they seen?
Thunder, lightning.
Okay.
Smoke.
Thunder, lightning, even the command. Don't even come up to the mountain, because if you touch it, whether it's you or if it just happens to be an animal that just wanders on there by accident, doesn't matter. Death happens. Death occurs. So you've got even kind of a fear-based type thing going on. We can't move. We're kind of trapped. We can't go backwards. We can't go where we came from. We can't go forward because Moses is not here. We can't go up because we've been told not to. What else is going on? Why else are they bothered by the delay? So we've got, again, uncomfortable. We got maybe a fear-based and just seen a lot of scary things. Yes, ma'am.
I remember something that they feared he was dead in the night, that Moses wasn't coming back, and that would have been their only link to God. At that time, I think they believed they couldn't approach God without Moses. But I still can't wrap my head around why they would build a golden calf if they thought he was that awesome that he had killed his leader. Why would they go against him? It just doesn't make sense.
So you're right. They fear that he's dead. Again, 40 days, 40 nights. Who's going to survive on a mountain? We didn't see him travel. We saw him travel up with the 70 people. We don't know what's become of them. Again, 40 days, 40 nights. It's not like you can text somebody. It's not like you can call somebody. It's not like you can walkie-talkies. There's no form of communication whatsoever. So you're left with a lot of wondering. Fear sets in. We fear that he's dead. And Miss Heather makes a really good point. Moses is actually our link to God. If he's not there, if he's not there to speak, if he's not there to mediate, who's going to talk? How's God going to talk to us? How are we going to talk to God? There's a lot of questions and that contributes. A lot of unknowns contribute for them being bothered by the delay. What else can you think of? Can you think of anything else that would contribute to them being bothered by the delay with Moses being gone for 40 days and 40 nights?
Well, they also dealt with thirst and hunger
Okay.
up to this point, and every time they had to deal with that, they complained to Moses because they claimed that they had it so good in Egypt, they never thirsted, they never were wanting for food, and they always wanted to go back.
Okay. So they know thirst, they know hunger. To a certain extent, I'm just going to assign this word, even though you didn't say it, Jack. They're in a vulnerable state. And again, whether they complain or not, the outward manifestation is certainly something that God doesn't want, and God certainly gets tired of. But nonetheless, they are vulnerable. They're leaderless. Even Joshua's gone. So there's not even a lieutenant that's there. There's the only one that's there is Aaron, and he must have traveled back down from the mountain. Everybody else is gone though. On that. So even if we have a problem, who's going to help solve the problem? Because every time we've had one, thirsty, hungry, whatever, we may have complained about it, but Moses was able to talk to God and be able to solve it. What else?
I was going to say, back to the golden calf, do you think that maybe they were starting to lose faith?
We'll get there in just a moment. Just hold on to that. We'll get there in just a moment. What else can you think of that is contributing to the fact that Israel they're at the end of their rope with this? What else is going on? Put yourself there. And yes, we've talked about fear. We've talked about uncomfortable.
They're also stuck there.
Okay.
They're not moving anywhere. At least when they're wandering, they're doing something, right?
Yeah.
So now they're just waiting
Yeah.
for what?
Yeah.
So,
And that's one of the things I was looking for. They're just in a holding pattern. And I don't know how many of you have ever flown, but one of the most unwelcome announcements on a plane from the pilot is that we are in a holding pattern. And any of you ever been on a plane and that happened? And you don't feel going in a circle, but you just know, this is what a holding pattern is. And Beth is absolutely right. At least when they were wondering, they at least had what we would call a sense of direction. There's nothing like that. We're just sitting here. Bob, go ahead.
Who's going to take control and lead them out of that mess?
Do I now?
Who's going to take control and lead them out of that
Okay, so again, we haven't seen Moses, so you got another question. Who's going to do this? Because when we were wondering, Moses was there, but then you also had God, and we hadn't seen the Lord. It's just been this thick, dark cloud, what you were talking about a second ago. You got all of these things going on. Go ahead.
They were not long removed from the islands of Egypt.
Okay, again, you're maybe a month and a half to 2 months at the most removed from Egypt. That's about how far we are. We're not very far away from those events. So all of this, take all of this. You're putting this into a pot. Go ahead, Michelle.
It's a statement. I just find it interesting that even though Aaron was the speaker for Moses, he wasn't the leader that Moses was at this time, nor Miriam,
Yep.
his sister,
No.
even though they think they are.
They could. And we'll get to that in just a moment when we see some of this and what Israel does. So put yourself, you're there, and let's combine all of these elements that we have so far. So you're in a waiting period. You're just stuck. But you're waiting. And maybe you thought, I got a couple of days, we'll give Moses. Certainly God, if you'll give me just a second. Certainly God can do all of this. That's a few days. What's a few days? We can wait a few days. We can wait a few weeks. 40 days, it turns into that. You have fear. Okay, so fear is very prevalent. You've got what Brian was talking about just from a physical standpoint. You're just uncomfortable. You got 1 million plus people at the base of a mountain. You've got animals on top of animals, people on top of people. You're probably frustration is setting in. So if you're vulnerable, going to Jack's point, you're vulnerable just because your emotional state, your mental state, your spiritual state. So if you're one of them, in terms of the Israelites, how are you feeling? What's going on? You're probably worried. You're probably anxious. Because you got kids. Let's say you got kids. That's even harder. It's even harder. It's hard enough for you to wait. You got to wait. You got to tell your kids to wait. Well, how long? Well, I don't know. And it's just the same thing. You're afraid. You got lots of questions that no one can answer. No one can answer. It sounds a lot. It sounds very relatable, doesn't it? To all of us. And I'm not making any type of excuse for Israel, but I am making this. It's understandable to see why they get to the point where they think, we got to do something. Right? Like, we don't know what it is, but we have to do something. We can't wait another 40 days. We can't do this. And I say that because all of us have been there, whether it's a dinner table at midnight or at 6 o'clock in the morning with ourselves or our spouse. We can't keep doing blank. We have to do something. You ever said that before in a conversation? Yeah. Except this is what happens. When we have all of that happening inside of us, whether it's inside of us or inside of our family, that's usually the time where we make perhaps the worst possible decision we could ever make. So Russ, and then Jack.
They also remember that God took them out of Egypt and He did certain things to them, helped them along. And now they felt like they were alone, so they wanted God to help them, but they didn't know how to do it.
Yes, good, great point. And I didn't even think about it, but you're right. All of this amounts to we're alone. Maybe they're not abandoned, but we're alone. And then you're right. Even up to this point, perhaps, given the benefit of the doubt, we have learned God can solve the problem. But Moses was always the way that we could get to God, for lack of a better way. There is no Moses. There's not even a Joshua. We got to do something, though, right? And that's the tension that exists. It's like we can't do this, but we can't do this either. And you're stuck literally in a rock and a hard place. All right, Jack, go ahead.
Well, it's going along with that. They were living in Egypt all that time with the idol worships of their different gods.
Sure.
And they fell back onto that because, again, there was no Moses and no God leading them, so they fell back to what they knew.
Yeah.
For those 400 years.
And that is one of the things that's coming out. So you mentioned, Ms. Heather, a minute ago, I don't understand, and a lot of us would say we don't understand either. As we're reading this, how could they not? But then if you take a step back, we absolutely understand. Because, go ahead.
We do it.
Yeah, we do it. It's not that we understand because we can logically put it together. It's because we actually have lived it. Think about the time that you made one of the worst possible decisions. Sin or not, let's just call it. Either way, think about it. You could probably look back now and you could look at this recipe and you could identify loneliness, fear, isolation, worry, lots of questions that no one can answer at this moment. You've tried everybody that you know that try to give you some wise counsel. You've looked at yourself. You maybe even have read the Scripture. You've attended a service. You've done everything that you know to solve X, whatever it is. And then, when you did all of that, you still had it hanging over you. Or I have it myself. I've had it myself. But I can't keep doing what I'm doing. I can't, to Beth's point, I can't keep waiting though. Something's got to be done. And so, if I can't do this, guess what naturally happens? We fall back to what we've always done. Whatever it is. Now, that's not all the time, but at least some of the time, like you said, David. Go ahead.
It makes me think that they just need to trust God.
Yes.
And we all do that, where we wait and and then we take matters into our own hands.
It is. And that's why it's so relatable. It's make no mistake. I mean, I chose to stop in the reading where we did. They had to drink their mistake. Literally, they had to eat it. Right? That's the equivalent of make your bed and sleep in it. I'm not trying to diminish the sin or the consequences. But church, we're just like them. It may not, whatever our mountain is and wherever our advisor may be, you're absolutely right. That's where trust is needed. But it's not there. So we'll start with David. Several of you raising your hands. We'll start with David.
It kind of reminds me of what happened over in, I guess it's Numbers. Maybe it's Joshua. It's probably Joshua. Where Joshua ran into the Gideonites, the people that faked it and pretended they came from a long distance. And
Yes, okay.
crummy clothes and dry bread. And they made a deal for the Israelites to protect them,
Yes.
rather than destroy them. And later on, after that event, it says that God was kind of upset with Joshua because Joshua just went the deal. Made the deal. He didn't consult God through prayer. And Aaron has made the same mistake here. Luckily, I've never done the same thing. That was human. But I also noticed in what you read in 32:24, I didn't realize it, but Aaron was the first advocate of evolution. Because you throw stuff in the fire and this animal popped out.
It popped out, yeah. And when we get there to that part, it's going to be fascinating to see Aaron in his own right, in his own place. So it's almost, what we're doing is looking at this whole story, but we're looking at it from three different ways. We're looking at it from Israel's point of view, and then in just a moment we're going to look at it from Aaron's point of view. Then we're going to see it from God's point of view, and you really could multiply it. We're going to see it from Moses' point of view. And you're just going to see it from four different angles because everybody sees something different. I thought it was irony where Moses kind of goes to bat for Israel. Look, don't be so hot. Don't be so angry. Calm down. He gets down there and sees it, and he's burning, right? It's God. God has this reasoning. The whole thing has all of that, but for this specific thing with Israel, put yourself in the shoes of Israel for a moment. And see how, and reflect on your own life, family life, and how we have done the same thing, maybe even today. Bob, and then we'll get to Beth.
Margaret suggested the word abandonment.
Okay.
Which sums it up very bad.
Okay.
Very well, but the whole concept makes you feel terrible.
You mean as far as Israel thinking they've been abandoned?
Abandoned by Moses, by God, by everybody, and here you are in the middle of this awful place.
Yeah.
And you've got this horrible feeling of abandonment. I can't think of much worse than feeling abandoned.
Yeah. That's a good word. And it's very possible that's a contributing factor. Ms. Beth, you were raising your hand a second ago.
Yeah, I have a question. So Aaron made the proclamation and said tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord. So were they intertwining the calf with God, or is the Lord the golden calf Lord? I've always had that question, and I've never really sorted it out.
We'll get there, and we'll do a in-depth in it. But they're actually where God says you'll have no other gods before me. As far as when we went through that in the Ten Commandments, He was saying you don't have anything equal with me. And the idea of Aaron is, I know I'm not supposed to have done this, so I'm going to have a golden calf, but we're not going to forget the Lord, and we're going to have both.
So I was just-
That's the idea.
I was just at a Catholic funeral. They were talking about baptism and the importance of baptism, but then, they were sprinkling the holy water and doing the incense, and it's kind of like this, they were adding to,
Yep.
they have the basic concept of God there then, from what you're saying. Aaron, had a mind shift that, uh-oh.
It's not, and you mentioned intertwine. The better word is he's mixing both. We're not gonna forget the Lord, but we're not gonna abandon this golden calf either. We're just gonna do both, and that is just as egregious sin as anything else. Which makes me reflect again. That's one of the lessons is how many times am I trying to do both, the Lord and something else? And that goes to your point in terms of trust. I'm trusting the Lord and fill in the blank. And that, again, that's another position where it gets us into trouble with it.
The Cavs said the same thing when they made the other temple in Bethel.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, yeah. Not right now, though. Not today, but we will get to there. Go ahead, Ms. Carroll.
It just reminds me, when you talk about having to reflect on us, it's easy to get swept up in the crowd moment.
It is.
And be led by your emotions, and it's just a reminder to me that to be careful when there's a fervor around you. We have witnessed it in our country, we've witnessed it in other countries, of people getting swept up by people excited about something, and it seems like it became a very festive atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
It's very easy. I think we're told our emotions are great, but they should never lead. And it just reflects to me that how important it is to be careful, to test ideas and to take them to the Word, as well as to be careful that we're waiting for but it feels so good, or it's,
Yep.
This is exciting. Because that waiting on the Lord can be, in my own life, at times I'm like, okay, how long do I have to wait? And it's easy to be prey to Satan taking advantage of that.
It is.
To us getting swept up in ideas beyond God or outside of God.
Yep.
Just going off the abandonment, I think God realized that that's what they were feeling, and that's why he punished them the way that they did. Could have been a whole lot worse.
Could have
But
been.
he didn't, because he could tell that they were lost.
Yeah.
Because he had been with them from the moment they left. They could see him all the time, all the time, all the time, and all of a sudden, they don't see him.
Yep.
And the
No.
feelings of loss and abandonment would definitely weigh heavy on a whole lot of people who went from being cared for and taken care of their entire lives to feeling what just happened.
Yeah, and that was the, go ahead.
Oh, they could have started praying or asked Aaron to start praying.
Yeah, and these are all the lessons that we're getting into, because, and Carol, to your point, being swept up in the fervor and the emotion that's there, again, desperation, abandonment, no questions, no clarity, lots of waiting, lots of fear, lots of stress, lots of worry, and boom, you make a decision, but it's an emotional-based decision. And then everybody else is making the same thing. And then Ariel, like you said, if abandonment is the case with what Bob and Russ were talking about, that's just even worse, because you're in the most vulnerable. And then you're the only one that has said this thus far. When does Satan attack? When you're at your weakest, when you're at your most vulnerable, individually, family-wise, church-wise, it happens. And this is what bothers them, and it becomes the perfect recipe of a downfall. And think about this again, and I'm not letting us off the hook, because what they're going to do to Aaron is terrible. What they're going to allow their emotions to do to Aaron, to give him a pass for a moment, I don't know if I wouldn't cave to a million plus people who are just swept up in a lot of different things. I don't know if it's just one of me and there's a million of you. I'll take my chances that the Lord would forgive. I'm not giving them a pass, But we've got to put it in a context to understand. My point for us is actually, April, what you said. Wherever you are right now, you got to recognize what's guiding and what's driving the ship. And if where you are is a waiting period, whatever the waiting period is, the holding pattern is, as uncomfortable as it is, as frustrating as it is, as unknown as it is, got to maintain that trust. Not just a faith, but a trust. Remember the whole lesson, the one lesson of Israel in the wandering was that they had to learn that God would provide. Whether it was bitter water made sweet, whether it was manna from heaven, whether it's protection from enemy, whether it's at Sinai with the law, God will provide. And they needed to know whether it's in one day, or if it's 40 days, or if I got to wait 400 years, the Lord doesn't change. But the tug of Satan is in the form of a question. Are you sure he can be trusted? Are you sure that he will deliver? Are you sure that he'll do that? Because if you're not sure, maybe it's now the time to do something about it. And if you fast forward to Jesus, when he's tempted, his very first temptation is that question. It's never asked. You know, if you're the Son of God, you can turn these stones into bread. I.e., are you sure God will provide? Because you and I both know that you can take matters in your own hands. And you can do something about it. So when Jesus reaches back in Deuteronomy, and man doesn't live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God, he is going back to a time where there is a nation. And part of their history, this is where they did not live by the bread of God. They lived by their own. And when they did, it opened a door that impacted them for the rest of their national history. Which is why this is the other point for those of us that are adults and those of us that have children. Our decisions today, as parents and as grandparents, will impact our children and our grandchildren. Because David, you're absolutely right. When the kingdom is divided in 1 Kings, you know what happens? Not one, but 2 golden calves are built. And that's hundreds of years after this event. Where did they learn to build a golden calf? Not just Egypt, but our family did it. You got to be careful. I cannot stress enough that for all of us, our gods, this is the default that you and I were talking, that we're talking about, that Jack was talking about too, what we go back to what we know. We will fall back into what we trust. Whether that's ourself, whether that's something else, or whether that's God. And if we're not constantly putting ourselves into God's care with full trust, rest assured we will take matters into our own hands. And when we do, and we wonder why things don't work out the way we want them to work out. Very quickly, Jack, hold on for me. Very quickly. So the people, the English Standard Version is kind of nice about it. They gather themselves to Aaron. They literally gather themselves against Aaron. That's putting it, they gather themselves to Aaron almost like we just want to have a conference call. We'd like to talk about this. That's not it at all. They come, and Aaron, they got to blame somebody. Somebody's got to take full brunt of this. Somebody's got to have the full blame. Somebody's got to do something. There's no Moses. There's no Joshua. But there's Aaron. We will go after Aaron. And so they gather themselves against Aaron, and they make a demand. They don't ask. They don't request, they demand. When we take matters in our own hands, even if the emotion is what's driving the ship, it will lead us to say things and to do things to other people that we will never be able to undo. And we will set ourselves up against people, even people who are there to help us. And we would end up doing things that we will make demands. You fast forward in Israel's history, and there's another prophet of God. And Israel gathers themselves against him, and they make a demand. Do you remember what that demand is? You remember who the prophet was and the demand that they made? The prophet's name was Samuel, and the demand was, give us a king. Be careful. You will get what you ask for. It does. It does. Get up. And again, this isn't to let Aaron off the hook, because Aaron has his own failure. Make no mistake. He utterly fails at leadership. But again, if I'm Aaron, and there's a million of you, and there's one of me, and Carol, you put it perfectly, everybody's swept up. But that's where you got to have conviction. And that's where courage has got to come in. Because if it doesn't matter if it's 1,000,000-1, stand on what you know is right, and stand on what you know is good, and stand on what you know is true. Because Aaron was there. He saw the Lord. He ate with the Lord. He communed with the Lord. He was there. He spoke for the Lord on Moses' behalf. I cannot stress enough that we repeat the golden calf when we allow all the other things to be the predominant voice. We're Israel. Maybe that is why the most quoted proverb, and we'll close with this, is the one you know. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart, and lean not on your understanding. Because if you lean on your own understanding, you'll take things into your own hands, and you'll make a mess. But if you trust in Him with all of your heart, and lean not on your own understanding, He will do what? You know the proverb, He'll do what? Make straight your... Where do you need to trust? Yeah, the class is yours.